Aloha, everyone. I'm going down the road here with the Romans. I've just gotten started. I'm going to continue with the opening discussion. We're going to finish the discussion on the Roman Republic today. You heard sort of the story of Aeneas and the famous story of Romulus and Remus. And I should probably say that these are difficult to nail down. Did those characters actually really exist? Were they just parts of a great story? Well, what I would say is that the ancient Romans did believe they existed, and ancient Romans did base much of what they did on the history and the connection of those people during that time period to these famous ancestors of theirs. These ideas of being long distance, the Romans saw being long distance descendants of the people of Troy as something good and something to be proud of. And the story of Romulus and Remus and survival and doing whatever they can to survive, those are things that resonated with the ancient Romans. So whether they were true or not, I don't know, but I like to think they are. And I think ancient Romans thought that as well. So I finished with you right here the other day, the last time, this definition of republic. All right, this is something we've already hit upon because if you've seen my discussion on political spectrum number 2, this is an important part of political spectrum number 2, isn't it? The concept of a republic. And we define republic as rule by law. Okay, now, one of the other things that you should remember about the Roman Republic that is very fascinating and brand new is this kind of discussion of branches. Okay, so now you recall that Romulus is the guy. All right, Romulus is the guy. Remember, Romulus is the first king of Rome, and then one of the very, very first things Romulus does is he establishes, if you recall, the Roman Senate. And this is one of the great early, you can make the argument this is even before the Athenian assembly exists. Okay, one of the great, first great legislative bodies in the history of humanity. Well, at this particular moment, remember now we're at 509. Okay, remember we have just formed. The king has been removed, and we're at 509 BC. I commented this is 19 years before the Battle of Marathon, and really the Persian War is getting started, and that's going to be the Greeks' high point during that time period. So the Greeks are sort of at their high point, and the Romans are just on the rise. But what do the Romans do? They add to the Senate. They add new branches. Now see if this whole concept sounds familiar to you. I'm sure it does. They add 2 new branches, and they call these other branches the assembly, and this other branch, they call it the 2 consuls, not just 2 guys. Okay? And what's interesting about this is that citizens of Rome, and I'm not just talking about the upper class, and I'll get into the classes in a moment, but regular citizens could vote for assemblymen. Okay, so now this is this discussion and the difference between the Athenian direct democracy. The Athenians had a direct, in other words, if you were a member of the assembly, you directly voted on every single aspect that was put before you. There was 5,000, there's a lot of guys. Whereas in Rome, they're voting for representatives, assemblymen, to represent them and vote for things for the citizenry in the system. Okay, so Roman citizens could actually vote for assemblymen. They could vote for another group of government officials, several groups, but the most well-known ones are Roman tribunes. And these were lower-level government officials who served the government of the Roman society. Roman society was divided into 2 groups, really. I'm not necessarily, okay, there's really a third group. There's a third group of slaves. Slavery is very much a part of the Roman society. They're sort of the third group. The 2 classes that we discuss in Roman times, all the way through both the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire period. The first one is the patricians. And these are the landowners. These are the families that go back the furthest. In fact, patricians often discussed how they were part of the original group. Remember that was my discussion about the nobility way back when we were talking about rivers and irrigation and the land next to the river being the most valuable. Supposedly these patricians all trace themselves back to the time of Romulus. And Romulus, it was said that Romulus picked his good, about 100 of his good friends to become senators because they were people who had been around the longest. And so they were the original senators. And patrician class, okay, the patrician class, even by 500 years later, when we get to Julius Caesar's time, all those senators, Julius Caesar, tied themselves back to this time period. So patricians could be in the Senate or the Assembly. The other class is the plebe, what we call the plebeians. All right, and these are the common people. All right, and they could only be in the Assembly. That was the only group they were in. And let's not just say that they were poor. There were certainly poor people. Okay, there are certainly poor people in the plebeian class. All right, but there's a lot of well-to-do, well-off middle class, what we would call today a middle class. And I'm not saying this is necessarily its own separate third class. In more modern times we say, oh, upper class, middle class, lower class. Okay? Upper class, middle class, the poor. That's not what I'm necessarily trying to argue here. There wasn't this third class. The middle class people were part of the lower class. It's the best way for me to put it to you. Okay? They were, middle class people were even super successful, frankly, wealthy ones were still plebeians because they weren't landowners. Being a landowner was the key. Now, if you were given land, you could be a plebeian and be given land by the government of Rome. That didn't automatically make you a patrician. All right, now here's something I want you to always remember when you think about Roman times. It is an acronym. Ready? SPQR. All right, this is the motto of the ancient Romans. SPQR stood for Senatus Populusque Romanus. Right now, who thinks they can? That's in Latin. Okay, who thinks they can translate that into English? Well, you probably see Senate. Okay, you see populous people, and you see Romans or Rome. What is that? Okay, well, I think you can figure out this means the Senate and the people of Rome. All right, and this was the motto of the ancient Romans. And so, this was to argue that the society of Rome was all one together. From the Senate to the two consuls to the assemblymen, all the way to the people who voted for the assemblymen. Everyone is together in this thing, all the way from the Senate to the people of Rome. One straight line, all together. So when they would ratify a law, the Roman Senate, they had a stamp, okay, and they would go cha-chunk, stamp. The stamp said SPQR. What did that mean? Well, this law has been approved by the Senate and the people of Rome. The Roman army would march into battle, and they had standards that said SPQR. Who does this army represent? This army represents the Senate and the people of Rome. Okay, so this line from the Senate all the way back to the citizens of Rome. Okay? All right, now, this sounds really good stuff. Okay, well, it wasn't always perfect. And one of the major themes of the Roman Republic, that's our Roman Republic, was that the plebeians were always in a battle to gain rights, to maintain whatever rights they had. Okay? And it was not always easy. And certainly the patricians were not easily forthcoming with a lot of extra rights given to the plebeians, right? The plebeians kind of had to earn their rights. And what they do, one of the things that happens really in the 490s BC, not too long after the formation of the Republic itself, the entire plebeian population of Rome threatened to leave and go somewhere and build their own city. And their argument was, if we, the common people, all leave Rome, you patricians, we'll leave you behind. This entire city will come to a halt. And they probably would have been right. And so they did this threat on several occasions to leave. And this forced the patrician class to do something about it. And this thing they did is one of the great creations in the history of law, in the history of battling for the rights of all people, something called the 12 Tables. Now, I'm not going to go into too much huge things about this, but the 12 Tables was a written document that somewhat dealt with this. And what they did was these 12 tables were basically eventually My understanding is they were they were written down certainly, but copies of them were made out of bronze and displayed in public, so all Roman citizens could read them. And these, is this a code of laws? Not exactly, kind of, it's just sort of what we would sort of say a standard basis, almost a constitution maybe. I don't know exactly if that's probably the best way to do it. But what it did was it made official certain rights of all citizens, and I would also say all duties. So there was an element here that it wasn't just what you got, it was also what you had to do, okay, of all citizens. There was a process for trials here. And I think that you shouldn't, that probably doesn't surprise you very much, that there's a process for trials, okay? There's an element of property rights, okay? That's to protect land rights. So especially land rights protects patricians, property rights could protect patricians and plebeians, all righty? Rights of inheritance. You couldn't just steal something because somebody dies. There has to be a period of law that determines where that property goes. There's an element of protection of power protection from power of the government itself. This is very unique. This is very unique in ancient times. Okay, so this is a very, very covering the surface, but I would say the 12 tables is something that if you are interested in law and government, the 12 tables is something that should always be part of your study as something that was a great moment in history. I want to say a very key point about the Roman Republic that has a lot to do with the great success of the Roman Republic and eventually and ultimately the Roman Empire itself. And that was that the Roman military was a citizen military. And we sort of see this with the Spartans. The Greeks were in essence mostly this way. The Persians were the opposite of this, okay? The Roman military was a citizen military. There are no slaves in the Roman military, okay? And citizens volunteered. And I think that history demonstrates that citizen militaries, and not even ones with drafts, volunteer citizen militaries are extremely what I would call lethal. They fight much harder than a slave or mercenary military would. Okay, why? Well, what does a citizen have to fight for? Well, a citizen fights for property, potentially. They fight for their family. They fight for their friends. They fight for their way of life. Those are things that are of value that somebody would fight very hard for. What does a slave fight for? Well, I think a slave fights for another day. I think a slave fights for a potential opportunity to be free. A slave might fight for the fact that their enslaver may free them one day. But it's difficult for a slave to fight really hard because why would a slave want to fight really hard for his enslaver? Potentially a slave could be forced to fight against his own people across the battlefield. What does a mercenary fight for? A mercenary is somebody who fights for money. And a mercenary may very well fight for you today, but tomorrow if somebody offers him more money, he may be fighting you. So this is one of the aspects that causes the Roman Republic to really become an empire, even though it's a republic. And the Romans will go on to defeat groups of people, particularly as they grow. The Greeks and the Macedonians, we're going to, you remember Alexander the Great, who was a Macedonian, okay? Alexander the Great was very successful. Alexander the Great really sort of won wherever he went. But really his descendants could not maintain it, and they could not defeat the Romans. In many cases, Romans would win victories over much larger armies and much more established historical armies like the Greeks and the Macedonians. We're going to discover the story of the city-state of Carthage and their most famous leader. Okay? And the elimination of these rivals made Rome the most dominant city in the Mediterranean area. Now, the Romans do something very interesting that is very unique to history in total, not just to ancient history. They would offer citizenship to those they conquered. Now, this is really sort of brilliant. They didn't do it right away, but the Romans would give citizenship to conquered peoples. Now, why is this a good idea? Well, it really sort of eliminates uprisings. It eliminates revolts. Now, it didn't do it completely, but generally, what would happen is that the Romans would come in and they would say, okay, listen, we'll give you two choices. Number one, we can totally kill every one of you and take everything. Number two, we can come in here and we can build roads and we can build some aqueducts for you, and then eventually we're going to offer you citizenship. Well, what do you think most people, conquered people, would choose? They chose number two. And what was interesting is eventually most conquered people came to realize, hey, life is better under Roman leadership than it was before. Okay, so this is very smart. And this is the kind of thing that we see in modern times when former enemies become allies. Okay, so this is actually very intelligent what they're doing here. All right. Wealth comes pouring into Rome from military victories, and I would say also from massive amounts of trade. Okay, trade is coming in massive amounts, and so the city of Rome is becoming an extremely wealthy city. Okay, so now what's the importance of the Roman Republic, sort of to get through there? I'm going to make 5 sort of short points. That's all going to fit on my last piece of paper here. The 5 important points I want to make about the Roman Republic are this. Number 1 is that the word republic is used a lot in history now. A lot of countries in modern times today call themselves republics. Okay? Very good. As I've tried to establish in political spectrum number 2, this is probably the best form of government you can ever have. It's very difficult to maintain. It's very difficult to hold on to. But I think you would have to say, if you're discussing the history of republics, the very first one is ancient Rome. Okay, so that's the first thing I would say. Number 2, I have commented about this as well. We will have a time period called the Roman Empire, where Rome is ruled by an emperor, by a dictator. Okay, that is coming. The Romans become an empire while they are still a republic. Okay, so in other words, they conquer territory as this democratic republic place. All righty. I have just sort of talked about how they are going to be the dominant power of the Mediterranean area, and this is not just their military. Remember when I discussed with you the idea of the corvus? Okay, the corvus. That's an example of the domination militarily. But culturally, they're going to become dominant as well. And part of this has to do with the great engineering and architectural brilliance of ancient Rome. The Romans were brilliant architects. The Romans were brilliant engineers. And they were great builders. They had great building projects. So the architecture, so Rome, as Roman Empire grew and city after city fell to them, the Romans would come in and build roads and aqueducts, as I described a moment ago, but they would also build buildings that were similar to the ones back in Rome. Okay, and so you have this cultural influence that remains because the big, huge building project in the middle of what the Romans would call foreign city became the focal point of that city. And that focal point being Roman, okay, that was something that made a difference in that area. So the cultural influence, and again, we're talking about, in the grand scheme of things of Roman history, we're talking about 1,000 years. That is influential. The amassing of wealth from military victories and trade, as I just described to you, you would say, well, that must have been good. Well, let me just sort of throw this out at you. Not necessarily, okay? Because that starts to hurt the middle class. Now you can say, what? What in the heck are you talking about? What do you mean by that? Well, think about this, okay? What else is coming in? What is something of value that is coming in with these great military victories? Now, unfortunately, the reality of it is, one of the aspects of wealth that is taken by Romans from the places they conquer, even places they will eventually offer citizenship to, is the importation of slaves. Now, why is this bad for middle class people? Okay, beyond the fact that we should say that slavery is a terrible institution. It's an immoral institution, okay? It's also an economic disaster for any place that tries it. Slavery is an absolute economic disaster. And we will see it play out very clearly in Rome. So my point, what I'm getting at is, what kind of things, what kind of work do slaves do? Slaves do manual labor, okay? Now, if you're a Roman citizen and you have a bunch of business that needs manual labor, you get a slave. So you put a price up front, and then you really don't have to pay for anything else except food and shelter for that slave for the rest of the time. Why would I hire some middle-class person to do the work I need over and over again? It's a better investment to invest in a slave. Now, what happens to that middle-class business person, that middle-class person? Well, they lose out, don't they? All right? Slavery is an economic disaster as well as an immoral, horrific thing. All right? And then number 5 will be the last thing I will sort of mention here. What is the 5th thing of importance about the Roman Republic? Well, maybe you noticed as I talked about it today, and that is the 3-branch system of government, okay, that we think about in U.S. government system, both not both, but at all levels, the federal, the state, and local. All levels of American government always have 3 branches. You just think about us here. We have a mayor, executive branch. We have a county council, legislative branch. We certainly have a judicial court system here locally. You know that that exists at the federal level as well. Okay, so that was not something that was brand new. The founding fathers who came up with that 3-branch system of checks and balances. Remember that old saying? Okay, remember that business? All right, that is an invention of the Romans. Okay, everybody? So I would remember, here's some things I would sort of remember as I was going through this whole thing. I would remember Aeneas. Okay? Remember Aeneas? That's something I would sort of remember about the Roman Republic. Aeneas. Okay? I would remember the Latins. I would remember Romulus and Remus. Okay? I would remember the influence of the Etruscans. Okay? Remember that business. I would remember the concept of republic and its definition, rule by law. I would remember all the branches, Senate, Assembly, and 2 consuls. Okay? I would remember, if I were you, if I were talking about this, I would remember the patricians and the plebeians and what they were exactly. Okay? I would remember SPQR, that really says it all. All right? That really could say it all. I would remember this element of the 12 tables and how this was something that the plebeians bought into. I would remember citizen military. That's something I would remember about them. Okay? I would remember this offering citizenship business. I would remember that. Okay? And those are the things that if you can sort of focus on those things, you'll have the Roman Republic stuff nailed. All right, everyone? That is the story of the Roman Republic. I will tell you about the greatest threat ever posed to the Roman Republic the next time I tell you one of these movies, show you one of these movies. Okay, the greatest threat that ever was presented to the Roman Republic will be from a city-state called Carthage and their most famous general, a guy named Hannibal. Okay, and we will have that for you next time. All right, I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope this is all sort of wrapping together for you and you sort of see the connections between ancient times and modern times. All right, thank you so much. Thank you for paying attention. I will see you next time. Aloha.